Okay, so now I want to introduce you to geometry nodes, and it's a really exciting new feature of Blender that you can use to procedurally generate and lay things out in your scenes. Previously, we used other techniques like instancing, and we actually used hair, similar to the way we used hair on the trees the other day to put the leaf clusters on. Geometry nodes is actually faster and it's better. It's a little weird, not quite as intuitive, but when you get the hang of it, you can do really, really powerful things with it. You can even create entire models. People have made whole scenes just in the procedural node generator stuff. It's a whole other field, but I want to at least introduce you to it. Plus, it's a great way of scattering things around on our scene. So I have a couple things in here. I have my trees. I have my environment. Now, I scaled up my overall landscape compared to everything else. So you can see my water is like, I scaled it up by like 13,000, but we want to make sure we apply these scales. So I'm going to apply all transforms, and I want to make sure I do the same thing on the ground because I want my ground to be quite a bit larger than everything else. But I'm going to turn these two off for now so we can look at just what we have arrangement plant wise. So I made another tree. In addition to the tree I demoed, I still have that rock I made as well as some grass. But I wanted to show you one extra thing I added to my trees that's going to make putting these all together a lot more interesting. We can, in shading, if I go into my tree here, I've added a little something to the way I normally shade it. So I showed you the other time how we can just place a simple color into this. But there's also a really cool thing we can do if let's cut these out. I'll come back to connecting this up later. I added what's called an object info node, and one it has things called random. And if I take random and I plug that into a color ramp, just a default color ramp, let's place that here, and then let's place it on our base color. It's gonna pick a color between white and black at random, so every time I duplicate it, you can see it's a slightly different color. This is really cool because it means when we scatter these trees around, we can create something random. Now, I can take that a step further, and instead of just randomly picking colors, I set my ramp to what's called constant, meaning it doesn't blend between these. So if I set this to something regular, like I think B-spline or ease, it'll do the same thing, but it'll always try to pick colors in between, which is kind of cool, but maybe if you want this kind of look where it's sort of like much more random distribution, that's really cool. But it's going to pick colors based on how close they are. So if I want to say it's like some of the leaves are just turning autumn, but they're mostly green, I can do that same thing. You can see each new one is a chance for more randomness. And so as I scatter these, I might not want to delete all of these. Let's go, yeah, to this one. The other way we can do it, if you want, is to set it to constant. And if I set it to constant, then it only picks these colors. And however far it is on here, basically, you can think of it, it's got like basically a 70% chance of being this color. And then it's got like maybe a 20% chance, and then 10, and then 5. However big these sliders are how likely it is to be that color. Because what it's doing is it's giving everything a grayscale, and that grayscale is saying, I'm from here to here is the gray value I have randomly. I'm from here to here gray value randomly. So we can choose the odds of these different colors coming in based on these little guys. I mean, I think ease, cardinal is interesting. Ease might be pretty good. But I think I'm going to stick with B-spline on this one. I like the blending it was giving me. And so I put this on both of them. And then the other thing I did is there's this cool feature that lets me take from geometry node a back facing. So whether or not it looks forward or back. And I just plugged this in, so anything that's forward is white and anything backwards is black. I did this so that I could plug that black and white into this node, which lets me blend these two. And I plugged it into a RGB mix node and I gave it value. So basically it's going to change the value of this color. If I set it all the way up, you see it's like going to go really dark and really light. And I set it low and it just, without it, it does that just a little bit, and it gives me a slightly different color on the front and back. Again, I could color it different ways. I just like this as a way of getting the front and the back of my leaves different, so it adds up a little bit more mix and a little bit more variety. So that's the only thing I changed really on this to give it that idea. So now if I duplicate them, it'll create some different shapes for trees. So when I have all of these, I want to make a separate collection for just them. That way I can reference it, I can hide it, and I can use it without needing to see them. I definitely want to have these named. So like tree 1, tree 2, this is grass, my rocks. I really want to make sure these things have their own names. Otherwise, I'm going to run into trouble when I'm trying to search for them or trying to use them. So I'm going to select all of these objects here. I'm going to hit M to add them to a new collection. And I'm going to call this collection assets, maybe underscore geo or something like that, whatever we want to call it. And not only am I going to give it a name, I'm going to assign it, right click here, a color. I like a purple is fun for assets because I just kind of use that as a system. So that means I can turn this off and I can still use them, but they're now hidden. So now that I've got that set up, I can actually start implementing this on the ground. And this is where the geo nodes come in. This is really important, by the way, that you're using Blender 2.93. It just came out yesterday. It's the new LTS version. We'll be using it for the rest of the class. So you're going to want to go to Blender's website and download the 2.93 LTS version. We'll use it for the rest of the class. It's got a bunch of great features. It's super stable. So make sure you update to that because some of the features I'm using here are, as I said, brand new, but really, really great. So instead, I'm going to using the timeline down here in layout. I can drag this up and I can hit this little watch and I'm going to check Geometry Node Editor. And you might notice this looks a lot like the Shader Node Editor, and it is. It's almost exactly like the Shader Node Editor in function and the way it works. But instead of changing the way something looks, it actually changes the geometry and where things are located. So let's click my environment, my ground here, and in modifiers, we're going to add a geometry node modifier. This is going to create a new nodes for us, and let's call this something like object distribute, and you can call it anything you want. Gen, geo, it's whatever you want to call it. And one of the things I like to do is give it a little check here. This is a protect node, meaning that even if nothing is using something, Blender will just delete it for you. But if you click this, even if nothing's using it, it'll stay there. So I'm going to give it a quick save just in case. So what we see is happening here is it's taking the geometry of this object, this thing here, and it's saying output the geometry. And if I disconnect it, nothing happens because there's no geometry being output. The input isn't connected to the output. What I want to do is be able to add maybe one of these trees or assets to what's going to happen, but I need to distribute it to the whole location on the surface. So what we do with this, the way we do this is what's called a point distribute. So under geometry, I'm going to say Shift A, and we have this whole points menu, and we're looking for point distribute. Point distribute does exactly what it sounds like, and as soon as I click this, you'll see my environment goes away and it creates these little dots. These dots are the points. Basically, it's saying, hey, anywhere there's, take the surface of this object, and with whatever my density is set to, distribute a bunch of points wherever they need to go. Random is the default, but I can change the seed to randomize what they do. Every one of these is an individual location, kind of like an origin. All of these are kind of like origins to themselves. So if I take all of these points, I can do a second thing, which is a point instance. And I can click that, and it's going to take this geometry to a point instance, and it will instance any object I select. So if I go here, for instance, and I scroll through, and maybe let's go to my assets, open these up. Let's see if I can drag and drop these. And I take let's take just my rock sculpt. Get my grays back. So I can take my rock and let's drag it in. Well, let me just do it. Hey, it will. Cool. I can also search from here. So I can type in rock. So this rock sculpt low. And you see what's happening is everywhere there was a point, it puts a rock. And it's a lot of rocks, but it's not slowing my scene down because they're all instanced from each other, meaning they're really, really efficient. Now, what if I want, but my ground is gone? I don't have to duplicate it. What I need now is a join node. So let's go here, and we're looking for a join geometry. And this lets me take anything that's green and combine it together. So if I take that and I connect it to here, it's saying, hey, join up all that point instance kind of stuff with this. So I can alter and change up my density. Keep it pretty low probably because there's a lot of stuff going on here. Now this is pretty cool. It's scattering my rocks everywhere, but it's maybe not the most interesting thing because the rocks are all the same size. They're pretty much pointed in the same direction. Let's start actually randomizing things in here. So I'm going to add a new attribute, and it's called an attribute randomize. And what I'm going to say is take this point and make a change to something. And what attribute do we want to change? Well, let's change the scale. So just type scale in, and you can see what already happens is these rocks change. The minimum scale it can have is 0, which means nothing. The maximum is 1. I could set the max to 10 and the minimum to -10. It would turn them inside out. I probably don't want to do that. Let's set like 0.7 as our minimum and something like 3 is our maximum. You can see now it's actually changing the size of these rocks as they distribute. So however we want to set this is the minimum size it can be and the maximum size it can be. So, all right, that's pretty cool. And if I had a group of different rocks, I could actually put them together in a collection and distribute them that way too, which I'll show you in a second. So now we've got all these rocks. They're also something I would love to be able to randomize their rotation as well. We can do the same thing. Shift D to duplicate it, add it, and I want to do rotation. Now, it's not going to really rotate correctly right now because I'm trying to rotate it with this kind of value. Rotation is X, Y, and Z, so it can't be a float, which is just one single string of information. Instead, it's got to be a vector. And so now I have a vector that's going to say what's my minimum and maximum rotation on all these values. So if I set all these to like 360, it's going to say the minimum rotation is 0, the maximum rotation in each axis is 360. So it's going to really randomize how it can be pointed and how it can be distributed. Not bad. I'm starting to like, and this would be like, how long would it take me to place these by hand? Of course, I might still place some by hand to like help us distribute it. There's actually ways of doing clustering and grouping with this, but I feel like I'm throwing a lot at you already. So now let's see about getting some of the trees on our scene. Now I'm going to take this whole grouping, which has a bunch of the settings I want. I'm going to duplicate it, and let's go ahead and plug it into my geometry again. This time, I'm going to change my object to tree. Let's set that tree 1. And then we plug that into the same join node. Join is usually going to be your end node. All right, I got trees everywhere, but I got 2 problems. 1, I got trees underwater, which I probably don't want. And 2, I got trees rotated all over the place. I do want the trees to rotate because without this attribute randomize, they're really obviously in the same spot, and that's pretty boring. But what I want to do instead of letting them rotate is this is X, Y, and Z. We set these, and we think about which way is this rotating. This is rotating this way. This is rotating along this axis. So this is a nice random distribution of the rotation. And if I want, I could just give it a little tweak one way, a little tweak the other way, but not too much. Most of my rotation is happening in this factor. And again, I can randomly seed any of these. Scale I can really play with here. I probably don't want my scale to be as extreme, so maybe like I'm going maybe like at a minimum of like just point something and a maximum, because I don't want them to be too extreme in their differences. And now I got that other problem of, well, I've got some of them are underwater and I just want them in some spaces. What I need to do is be able to tell them through an attribute under point distribute what should go into my density? What should it be that decides where these points actually go? And we can do this with one of these vertex groups. So I've got one in here right now. I'm going to delete it so I can show you a new one. And I'm going to call this one foliage. And this becomes a group that I can assign shaders to. I'm going to turn off this geometry node. I'm just going to hide it in our viewport so we can just focus on where I'm painting my verts to be able to do this. So this weight is saying anywhere that there's a value called foliage, we're going to put that stuff. Actually, let's put it right in here right now. Foliage. So it actually recognizes the name because it's in here. And let's turn this back on and you'll see I got my rocks, but my trees went away, and that's because I don't have any value painted on foliage. So with my object selected, I'm going to go into weight paint mode, and I can actually draw value on using this tool. So right now, I don't have any weight, but if I start painting areas, trees start to appear where I'm painting. You can change up how bright or dull this is in this viewport setting. I think by default, weight paint is like really, really high, but I like to set it a little lower here so I can see where the grass is. So that lets me kind of pick up some regions where I think I'm going to want some of this foliage to blend in. Again, just like in sculpting, F changes the size of the brush. And this is just going to let me paint geometry and just paint where my trees go. So maybe I decide I don't want my trees going that close to the water. Anytime I want to get rid of it, I just change my weight to 0. And now I can, I'm in add. I want to make sure I'm in mix so that I can paint away anything I don't want. Set my weight back up to 1. Paint back away up little paths, stuff like that. So let's paint up, again, where I want trees. I'm kind of avoiding the rocky areas. And it's, like I said, way faster than just placing all these trees by hand. So now I got a distribution of trees, but they only exist exactly in those areas. And now we can up maybe my density a little bit, play with that. But I got just one tree, and that's pretty boring. So what I can do is choose between a couple trees by making it a collection. So let's save tree 1 and tree 2. Let's hit M on our keyboard, and let's make a new collection. And I'm going to call this trees. Okay, and let's give this green because that makes sense. I'll still turn both of these off. And now I can set it to collections, and I can say what collection should it get assigned. Let's assign it to trees. Now it's going to choose between both of these tree assets. Ooh, I've got like some weird stuff going on with this other tree. Oh, it's the assets have to be relative to each other. So I got to go back into trees because I got to show you this. This is why it's doing it. When it's doing an asset, it cares about where it is location-wise. It takes this into account. So I need to make sure these are both zeroed out. And on the stage, and both of their transforms all should be frozen, and they're going to sit right on top of each other. Sorry about that. Should have known better. So yeah, now they're more properly arranged and distributed. So we can set this density now, and it's the density for both of these objects. And so it's going to give me different trees, and it's going to give me some cool clusters of these trees. I think like density, let's set it to like 0.2. Feels pretty decent. You can play with some of these other like seeds and like randomly distribute them in different ways. There's also Poisson disk, which is a slightly different way of distributing points where it thinks about how close the points should or shouldn't be to each other, which can be pretty nice. I feel like it's putting both trees inside each other a lot, which I don't like with this distribute collection. So if I set it to not whole collection, it looks like it'll pick out across the points more like randomly which one goes where. So that's more, I think, what I'm looking for. Let's set this to random, and I can set my density up. Not too high. Ooh, be careful with these sliders. If you set your density too high initially, you can really crash this sucker. And now, like I've got this, I can do the exact same thing, the same sort of setting and scene with this, and apply it to my grass. So let's plug this in. Let's change the object I'm distributing to grass. And then we still need to get the geometry that we're generating the points from. Go. And it's creating the grass, but you can see it's in the exact same spots. So we need to change the seed, and we probably need to change up that density. And so grass, this is the whole point I was saying about grass, is keep it pretty wide because you can see they pack together pretty well. And it'll start to really fill in those gaps. And we can actually create a second field. I just have everything on foliage, but I could create a second vert group for just grass to distribute those. And I could create another vert group for just rocks and decide where I want the rocks. But this is a good kind of start to all of this. And now we have the ability to place also some objects by hand, like just by duplicating them using Alt-D to specifically place them how we want. But we got a good starting spot that's giving us a lot to work with. I think this grass is a little big. I'm gonna scale it down, make it not quite as large. So maybe a little bit more like that. Yeah, that's closer to what I want. So all this is exactly to how the distribution systems in like Unity or Unreal work. They sort of scatter things around here. We're just using them straight inside of Blender. So that's this here. In the next video, I'll show you how to do the last steps, how to put together a sky, how to add some clouds, and we'll get our final renders for our scenes put together.